Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Old Whaling Church. My name is Henry Louis Gates Jr. And one of the greatest pleasures, thank you. One of the greatest pleasures of my very pleasurable life is welcoming you each year to the Hutchins Forum here at the Old Whaling Church, hosted by the chairman of the board of the Hutchins Center, Glenn Hutchins, and his brilliant wife, Debbie. Glenn and Debbie's generosity makes this event possible and so many other things that we do at Harvard and throughout the country each year. Now, last August, just a year ago, I told you that Glenn would be responsible for a major change both in our field, the field of African and African American studies, and in our status at Harvard. And sure enough, on October 2nd, before a packed house of 1,200 people at Harvard's Sanders Theater, the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research at Harvard was born. In a remarkable ceremony at which we presented the coveted Du Bois Medal to Steven Spielberg, Sonia Sotomayor, Tony Kushner, and David Stern. And at that ceremony, Harvard's president, Drew Faust, and the entire Harvard community thanked Glenn H. Hutchins for donating $15 million to create the center. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the largest gift in history ever given to African and African American states. Give it up for my main man, Glenn Hutchins. Stand up, boy. That's what I'm talking about. That's serious money. Now, that was the start to our remarkable year, and our second is going to be just as momentous on September 3rd. Mark it down on your calendars if you happen to be in Cambridge. On September 3rd, we open our new Ethelbert Cooper Gallery of African and African American Art, the largest gallery for both African and African American art in the entire United States. The Cooper Gallery will be the 9th entity to fall under the rubric of the Hutchins Center, along with the great Du Bois Institute, of course, founded in 1975, and Harvard's already legendary hip-hop archive, conceived of, founded, and directed by my wonderful colleague, the brilliant anthropologist Marcelina Morgan. Give it up for Marcelina, the queen of hip-hop. Stand up, girl. I hope that each and every one of you will pay a visit to Cambridge to see the Hutchins Center in all of its 23,000 square foot glory, including an astonishingly beautiful facade which graces the cover of the annual report. Did you all get the annual report? Look at that cover. That is the new facade of our center. So for the first time, you'll be able to enter it street level on Mount Auburn Street, and our building now dominates that section of Harvard Square. Anybody think something black would dominate any section of Harvard Square? That was impossible. And all of this has been, oh, and by the way, that was designed by David Adjaye, one of the 5 greatest architects in the world, and certainly the greatest black architect alive today. And David is doing the African American Museum at the Smithsonian, too. And all of this, for all of our people, and for all who've given so much, all of this is made possible by one person's vision, his generosity, and his commitment to excellence with diversity, and that's Glenn. Isn't that an amazing thing? Really, it's a great thing. Now, I want to give special acknowledgement to others in this audience, the members of the National Advisory Board, who also write the checks. You know, I used to think when people would stand up and thank their sponsors and supporters, I used to think, wonder why they do that. Then I was put in a position where I had to raise money to make ends meet, and I understood why they do that. And these are the people who are there for us on an annual basis under Glenn's leadership and are very, very generous. Glenn, of course, Bennett Ashley. When I say your name, please stand up. Bennett Ashley. Carol Biondi. Governor Gaston Caperton from the great state of West Virginia. Nancy Garvey, Jeremy Henderson, Glenn's roommate from Harvard. You know, in a way, it was Jeremy who really did all this, because Jeremy first brought Glenn, a North Carolina boy, to the island for the very first time. So, you know, if you follow this logically, it's Jeremy who really should get all the credit, right? So thank you, Jay. Mitch and Frida Kapoor. Rob Lilly came all the way from London to come here. I mean, Doug Schoen. Is Doug Schoen here? Oh, I don't think he's come yet. My former classmate and inspiration from the great university, Yale University, class of 1972, Larry Thompson. And finally, Davis Weinstock. Is Davis here? Ah, Davis, there you are. Thank you, my dear friends, for your continuing support of the dreams and vision of the Hutchins Center. And now, we're here today to talk about the topic, Racing Obama, Unraveling Criticism of the First Black President. And for some people, as everybody in here knows, Barack Obama can do no right. For others, he could do no wrong. Let's take a look at this clip. Now it's time for me to take a moment to introduce the person who conceived of our theme this year, our inimitable moderator, a woman, of course, who needs no introduction in this church, on this island, or in this country, but whom deserves a most glowing introduction. The first African-American reporter for The New Yorker, a second for The New York Times, Charlayne Hunter-Gault first came to national attention as the subject of a news story herself. In 1961, she and Hamilton Holmes were the first black students admitted to the University of Georgia after a series of court challenges, exhaustive media attention, and violent, nasty demonstrations on the Athens campus. She later became one of the most influential figures in television news, where she was a chief national correspondent for McNeil Lehrer NewsHour on PBS and the Joburg bureau chief and correspondent for CNN. She served as chief correspondent in Africa for NPR, and she also frequently contributes pieces on Africa for TheRoot.com. Charlayne won 2 Emmy Awards and 2 Peabody Awards, and in 1986, she was named Journalist of the Year by the National Association of Black Journalists, which inducted her into its Hall of Fame in 2005. Her numerous awards include the 1990 Sidney Hillman Award, the American Women in Radio and Television Award, the Du Bois Medal for her contributions to the history and culture of the African and African American people. Charlayne is the author of the memoir In My Place, New News Out of Nowhere, Uncovering Africa's Renaissance, and most recently, ladies and gentlemen, To the Mountaintop, My Journey Through the Civil Rights Movement. Please give it up for my buddy, Charlayne Hunter-Gault.
Thank you very much. I asked Professor Gates not to read a long introduction, but after that hilarious Saturday Night Live segment, I'm glad we had time to kind of settle down, because this is not going to be funny. Well, it might, but generally it won't live up to that. So thank you very much, Professor Gates. It's always my pleasure to be here and engage some of the most challenging issues of our time as they relate to race. And today, certainly, as you've heard from Skip, is no exception. We'll be looking at the attacks on President Obama and how much of it is due to his race. That is, he is, by his birth certificate, which he's had to demonstrate numerous times, an African American. So we're going to look at that and how much of the criticism is really legitimate, and are his critics too harsh or his defenders too thin-skinned? Of course, let me be clear about our point of departure here. I have done some research, I've learned from Professor Gates here, and I have found tough, even harsh criticism of past presidents, including Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, Warren Harding, Jimmy Carter, and Bill Clinton. And while there were also attacks on JFK's Catholicism, neither he nor the others I've spoken about were attacked in quite the same way as Barack Obama has been. And the attacks I'm talking about include subhuman graphics and posters that read, "Don't renege," in 2012. There was a sign at Mulligan's Food and Spirits that displayed an ad outside that read, "I heard the White House smells like collard greens and fried chicken." Now, of course, that would have appealed to me if it hadn't been so racist and so untrue, because every time I've been there, I've had little tiny hors d'oeuvres that had nothing to do with collard greens and fried chicken, which would have been more appealing to me. But that was a very nasty thing, and it was protested, and it was taken down. But there were also posters that called for putting white back in the White House, portraying the president as a witch doctor with a bone through his nose. On more than one occasion, there were calls for the president to be hung, executed, one of which came from a black man. And while the North Koreans referred to the president as a crossbreed black monkey, here at home at least one politician portrayed his family as chimps. And another shouted at the president on the floor of Congress a few years ago, "You lie." And of course, right now, others are calling for his impeachment. So we need here today to look at the ways and the whys of such blatant racist attacks, but also criticisms, valid or not, and that is the question. So the bios of our panelists are in your program, so I'm not going to take up time, which is going to, I think, have us engaged in a wonderful discussion. So I'm not going to give you all of their bona fides. You can look those up later. But I will introduce first the man who always gives us the last word, dare I say the benediction, our distinguished Professor Larry Bobo, the W.E.B. Du Bois Professor of Social Sciences and Chair of the Department of African and African American Studies at Harvard. And he, as I said, will wrap up what I know is going to be a very constructive observation, as always, with his thoughts on how and if we can get past our current cacophonous discourse. Donna Brazile, who just a few moments ago arrived. We're so glad you did. You may be clapping because she's here or because you know who she is. And of course, everybody knows that she's CNN commentator and chef extraordinaire thanks to her New Orleans roots. Too bad she's going to be leaving this evening because we might try to get her to do some for us. But we're going to test her brain roots this time. Charles Blow. Many of you know him from previous... Well, you all know. The New York Times op-ed columnist who writes more on Twitter than anyone I know, and will, in his wrap-up today, give us the brief highlight of his new book, Fire Shut Up in My Bones, a memoir. Can't wait to hear a little of that. And Amy Holmes, behind whose lovely face is a sharp brain, as she declaims on CNN, and anchors her own show, The Hot List, online. Is that right? Online. And Armstrong Williams. See, he needs no introduction either. Pundit, political pundit, entrepreneur, columnist, television and radio host who currently heads his own daily radio show, The Right Side with Armstrong Williams, on Sirius SM. And you can read about all of his other bona fides because there are many. And so, Mr. Williams, I last saw you in South Africa. When was it? No, don't go there. We were there a long time ago together. 1991, early days. So I'd like initially all of you to give me, starting with you, Mr. Williams, your comments about some of the attacks that I cited, and as you know, there are more subtle ones. So where do you think those spring from, And how much do they influence public opinion about the president? And I don't know, maybe public opinion isn't quite the right term because there's so many publics these days. But anyway, give it a shot. And may I ask all of the panelists, when one is talking, if you turn off your mics, it's a little difficult, but I'll try to remember to do it too. Strong, you're on.
Well, thank you, and push this back. And it is so unfortunate, the personal attacks on the president. You know, the birthday issue, the images that you just so eloquently illustrated. But you understand, we live in a world, in a vast country, where there are still people who are just backwards and don't understand that the world has changed and they've been left behind. And sometimes when they resent policies and who's in the White House, sometimes the racism within comes out. Obviously, race colors a deeper resentment they may have for the president. But I would say that is less than 10% of our population. I think for the majority of us, we move past that ignorance and that stupidity. And in a country that distinguishes itself with freedom of speech, I would never limit their ignorance, because that's who makes us who we are as Americans. And yet they define who they are. I find it to be silly because there are so many issues that you can legitimately challenge and disagree with the president on. I don't see why they have to major in the minor leagues of ignorance, whether it's affordable care, whether it's the policies in Iraq, whether it's what's going on in Chicago, which is another Afghanistan and Iraq in the opinion of some people. I think there are legitimate debates that we can have that has nothing to do with race. I think it has to do with his policies, and I, for one, criticize his policies, and I voted for him the first time, and I didn't vote for him the second time. I voted for Romney, and I'm very proud of that fact, because none of us fit in a box. All of us don't embrace the same things. All of us are not entrepreneurs, and all of us are not moms and people who work in classrooms. And so there are certain things that does not appeal to me. And I think the part of freedom is that I can disagree with the president and still be respectful of him and still have the right to vote against him, not because of his race, but because I don't like his policies and I don't think it's what's best for America in the long run.
Thank you. And I am itching to come back to some of those specifics. But at the moment, let me ask you, Amy, because the other thing I didn't cite is coming out of Chicago and now picked up by the media, as they tend to do everything that's as negative as it can get. President Obama, the worst president ever. T-shirts and Twitter, not to mention the blogosphere. So I'd like your comment too on what is motivating this discourse that's so nasty.
The discourse that's so nasty. Well, my one and only job in elective politics was being a speechwriter for the former Senate Majority Leader, Bill Frist. And one of the things that I discovered to my dismay working on Capitol Hill under the Capitol Dome, writing speeches every day for Dr. Frist, was at that point, 2003, the deep partisanship that was going on, the nastiness, you know, the passion and frankly some of the ugliness that came out because of then President George Bush's policies when it came to Iraq. So I think, you know, this ugliness that is so distressing to so many people has actually been going on a long time. But as the examples that you cite when it comes to President Obama, for some, yes, there is a racial aspect to it. And there are ugly, mean-spirited people that put up the signs, as you mentioned, that go to rallies to express these views. But what I find has been a little bit more strange and peculiar when it comes to race and the president early in his presidency, I'm recalled to a conversation I had with Congressman Steve King. He's the rather colorful, pun intended, congressman from Iowa who seems always to be stirring up these issues with this sort of veiled invective. And he was a guest on a nationally syndicated radio show that I hosted, and he accused President Obama of hating white people because President Obama supported attacks on tanning machines. And, okay. And I said, well, wouldn't that mean that President Obama wants white people to stay white? And he said, oh gosh, I didn't even think of that. Oh yes, he wants to keep the races separated. I said, you may not be aware because this is radio, but you are speaking to an African-American woman. At which point you could hear a pin drop. And I went on to tell him, look, you can criticize the president based on his, left-wing policies that you disagree with him, but getting into this bizarre racial conspiracy theorizing, to me, is beside the point at best. Well, after that interview, his chief of staff called my radio producers instantly to put together a lunch between me and the congressman and said, anywhere you want to take him, Amy, anywhere. So it took me about a second, and I said, how about B. Smith's? Which I did. And I took him he joined me rather at B. Smith's at Union Station, clearly very uncomfortable, his hand rattling as he tried to pick up his coffee cup, surrounded by black people. And I said to him, look, you're accusing President Obama of pursuing policies based on his racial background. But think about it. The president proposes and Congress disposes. Who's been voting for all of this? Nancy Pelosi, a white Democratic Party for the most part. Harry Reid, white majority leader, passing this stuff in the Senate. You don't need to go down this path to have an effective criticism of the president. Now, why he does this? I think there are two reasons. Number one, there is a sense of defensiveness, particularly among white males and conservatives, that constantly being accused of racism, that they're looking for ways to push back that criticism in, I would say, some unfortunate ways. But secondly, I think for some voters that President Obama's race is a signifier of he doesn't share the same life experiences that I do. So they disagree with his policies and they chalk it up to this difference in life experience. Again, I would argue I don't have very much in common with Nancy Pelosi. I'm not a multimillionaire who lives in San Francisco. I can disagree with her without getting personal with her about that. And I have, in my own way, tried to keep my side of the ideological spectrum focused on the real, what I think would be helpful to the president, critiques and criticisms of his policy, because I know we're going to get into it later in this conversation. I fear that this presidency is basically in free fall. And so there you have it.
Thank you. Thank you. Charles, let me ask you to respond to the same question, because a lot of what I cited seems to affect the general atmosphere. I mean, when you look at the president's disapproval ratings right now, I mean, I don't know if it has to do with any of this, but tell me what you think about why the atmosphere and these kinds of racist attacks and what impact they're having.
It's really, I think it's a kind of a difficult question in a way. The amazing Toni Morrison once said, I'm paraphrasing here a bit, but the very serious function of racism is distraction. It forces you to defend something that is in need of no defense. And so while you're scurrying around trying to prove what is being said is in fact not true, all of that emotional, psychological, psychic energy that could be used towards the promotion of self, the promotion of community, the promotion of country is zapped out of you. And so you are left at the end of the day exhausted from the exercise of defending yourself against a lie, right? So, I mean, to the degree that, you know, there will always be people who are hateful in the world. That is the very nature of humanity. There are people who hate and there are people who love, and sometimes those emotions exist in the same person at altering times of the day and the week and the month. The president, I think, sets a great example of how to deal with that, though, which is that you don't always stay on it. He has acknowledged that there are probably some people who are primarily motivated by racism against him, and also acknowledged that there are probably people who are primarily motivated by racism in a way that helps him, like racial solidarity with him, and that those things are going to exist. I think that what we do when we focus so much on these kind of visceral attacks is we lose sight of policy differences between him and opponents, and whether or not those policy differences would be effective or not for the people who are doing the complaining or doing the supporting. And what I like to look at is whether or not what you are saying actually helps me, my family, me, my community, me, the race of people, African Americans, but also America, right? So if I look at Obamacare, for instance, I can actually understand the issues around it, but I can also look at what Martin Luther King said, which is that inequality in healthcare is the most vicious form of inequality. The idea that someone would not be able to treat or prevent an illness because they work at a job or two or three that did not provide a pathway to health care, and that they did not make enough money to afford it on their own. This, in America, in a civilized country, that just shouldn't be the case. So I look at the policies. Which I think are just more important than what people put on the internet.
Thank you. I'm sure we're gonna get to Obamacare in a minute or two. But Donna, can you go to the question of how much these kinds of awful things are actually affecting the entire body politic?
Thank you so much, and it's a great honor to be here and to be on this island, my first, and I know I've been every place once, but my first time to Martha's Vineyard, so thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. I guess this is not a battleground state, so, but I'm on my way to Florida, and that's still a battleground place. But, I'm a Louisianian, and we enjoy 4 delightful seasons. Yeah, who dat? Shrimp, crab, crawfish, and oysters, and I had some oysters, so I'm happy. If I was here a little bit longer, I would show y'all how to shake it, bake it, fry it, stir it, and enjoy it. So I hope to be invited back. Please, and I cook with grease, so thank you very much. But my sense of things, and I've been out here for a long, long time in the American politics, and I see so many friends in this room who, like myself, got up early one morning and decided we wanted to change America. And we didn't do it by just going out there and taking a poll and then begging people to go out and register and vote. We actually went door to door. We found out where they lived, where they played, where they prayed, and, of course, where they worked. And we registered millions and millions of Americans. And so we've arrived at this day. We've arrived at this moment in history because so many made it possible. That door was not open. Some people had to literally sit down. Some people sacrificed, gave of their lives. And I'm reminded this month, 50 years ago, Fannie Lou Hamer had to show up in Atlantic City to get the Democratic Party on the right side of history. So let's start off with the notion that much of what we're seeing is a backlash. It's a backlash that occurs when I think people believe that we've moved too fast, too soon, too quick, and guess what? We've arrived at this moment and some people are still catching their breath. I'm being nice. Some people will never wake up and determine that this is the 21st century. So it's not just a backlash against the individual, and clearly it's that. We can argue about the policies, but I can also argue from a different perspective that here's a president who have embraced some of Reaganomics, some of the trickle-down aspects, some of the tax cuts. I mean, 1/3 of his stimulus program was tax cuts. I mean, we can argue about the national security policies, and I can tell you where he kept some of Bush policies on the Patriot Act, wiretapping us. We can talk about his housing policies, his banking policies, and I can tell you that it's still hard to get a loan if you have a small business because of those continuation of those policies. So it's not just policies. Yes, it is the person. The backlash is real. And often we hear about it when we have one of those episodes. I call them episodes because when you're on CNN, you just know it's breaking news. I say, what is new? There's nothing, you know, my brother Charles and I are from Louisiana. Ain't nothing new about Clive and Bundy. Hell. Duck Dynasty. We grew up with them. They weren't characters on some TV show. We grew up right near them. We walked past them. And we're still walking past them. But the backlash is real. And the backlash takes all of this manifestation and public policy where we can't get nothing done in America. Even, you know, you can look at all of the policies from raising the minimum wage to providing health care to all people, making sure that every kid get a fair shot. I mean, President Obama is not talking about my family. He's talking about all American families. And yet, we constantly get drawn back into the racial vitriol. I try to get out of it every day. Because to get drawn back into that conversation is to take us back to the plantation. And as I often tell people, I am not going back. So here's one way to look at this. 27% of Americans view President Obama as mixed race. Now, the overwhelming majority of African Americans see him as black, but the overwhelming majority of whites and Hispanics see him as mixed race. So let's start off with maybe the way we perceive him is not, maybe he's not one of us, or maybe he's one of them. We don't know. So again, we're still trying to understand this moment, and which is part of the conversation that we have to have on race. The second thing, and I think it's also important to understand, is how does this play out in the body politics? And that's where the partisanship and the money comes into play. And the partisanship is ugly. I mean, the South, my segregated South, I mean, the South has resegregated itself. We have two parties in the South now, a black party and a white party. We don't have any such thing as a bipartisanship. And we got to figure out how we, you know, get back into integration, biracial coalitions, especially in the Native South, where there's been another migration of African Americans. So I think to wrap it all up, I think he has been a phenomenal president under the circumstances. And let me tell my brother Armstrong, who I've known since I was 21, this is not Kool-Aid. And if I put anything in my water, I hope it's wine, because I still believe when Jesus made that a miracle, I still drink to that. But no, he's been phenomenal under the circumstances. And just moving us to where we are today, making the incremental, because the partisanship, ladies and gentlemen, the partisanship that George W. Bush went through, Bill Clinton went through. Remember, the American people have been in a foul mood for over 10 years. I mean, it doesn't matter. We can put Elvis in the White House, or the Godfather, so whoever. Doesn't matter. The partisanship drives much of the conversation, and because the partisanship, with all of the money that's flowing, that keeps us separated. And I wonder if there's something larger than race that we need to deal with. Because that, I believe, is at play each and every day of our lives, the partisanship. And that's destroying America as much as the racism that continues to, you know, make its stance every now and then. Breaking news. Really?
Thank you, Donna. I want to come back.
Yeah, did you tell me to shut up?
No.
You know, my mama did the same thing.
No, you know, there's no way I would tell you to shut up.
She's your Georgia girl. You know, Louisiana girls, we got to get it out, honey, because we start low, go slow, rise high, strike fire, and then sit down. Then sit down. Hey.
See, I've known Donna for a long time, so there's no way I tell her to shut up. I just tell her to take a pause for a moment.
Pause is good.
I want to start back with you, Amy, because you just heard Donna say that this has been a phenomenal president and the backlash is real. Now, you say the president is in free fall. Can you discuss what she just said in terms of your own feeling about the president, and give us some specifics where you think the free fall is one or two?
Mike. It's interesting because you know that second terms for presidents often focus on foreign policy, and this was precisely the area where President Obama, I shouldn't say precisely, but the area that President Obama won the Democratic nomination was on foreign policy. It had to do with the Iraq War, that he opposed the Iraq War, he opposed the surge in Iraq, and now we see, as for many second-term presidents, that foreign policy is dominating the headlines and dominating his presidency. And we're discussing where is this criticism coming from. Well, I think in the past 72 hours, that has really scrambled the question when the criticism is coming from his former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, who Professor Gates will try to confirm for us whether or not there really was a hug out last night. She gave a very lengthy interview to Jeffrey Goldberg at the Atlantic Monthly, criticizing, lashing at the president in very specific terms over foreign policy. You have Larry Summers, who just wrote a blog post, your colleague, a former president of Harvard, saying that President Obama is already suffering the second-term lame duck curse. We're not even halfway through his second term yet. We're not even at the midterms, and already a former economic advisor to the president is basically, burying him. You also have Henry Cuellar, the Democratic congressman from Texas, over the immigration crisis, saying very openly on Fox News, on MSNBC, very openly, this president needs to be at the border, and that he said, quote, this could be President Obama's Katrina moment. Jim Webb, another Democrat from Virginia, the senator, he was quoted also as saying that he thinks that right now the president is bouncing from issue to issue, and he's very concerned that there's no focus. Dianne Feinstein, she has become very vocal in her criticism of this president. Just a few weeks ago on MSNBC, she said that while she wouldn't tell President Obama what to do, she does say that the world would appreciate his focus on these foreign policy matters. On Friday, she released a public statement. We're talking about the chairwoman of the Senate Intelligence Committee releasing a public statement telling the president that inaction is no longer an option and that armies need to be defeated with armies. Now, I cannot tell you how extraordinary it is that a member of the president's own party, the chairperson of the Senate Intelligence Committee, would go public with her criticism of the man sitting down at 600 Pennsylvania of her own party overseeing all of this. So when we're discussing where is this criticism coming from, it's coming from across the political aisle. A lot of political watchers extremely concerned that this president seems disengaged and uninterested at the matters at hand, including members of his own party. Now, I think it was, frankly, and I'll say it out loud right here on the panel, I think it was very bad form for the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, to so publicly criticize the president as he is sitting in the Oval Office. I think it's very disloyal. That's my personal preference. But once again, the criticism is coming across the aisle. I'll give you one last example. Congressman David Scott from Georgia, he went to the House floor thundering with anger over President Obama and what he considered the president not being engaged in the VA hospital scandal. And he said, President, we need you to roll up your shirt sleeves and address this. Thankfully, that happened before Congress went out into recess for the August recess, rather. Fortunately, they were able to do it, but that was because of bipartisan criticism of President Obama. I mean, you just have to look at that list. It's coming from all directions.
That's full and very substantive. Thank you very much. Donna, I see you not drinking Kool-Aid down there. Can you just give us a little response to that? I mean, it's coming from everywhere.
I thought I had a big mouth. It's still limited, but there's no question that, at a moment's notice when there's a crisis, whether it's in a down airplane in the Ukraine, and what's the United States response, when it's the situation in Gaza, and what's the U.S. response, and it's all of the other stuff, including the weather patterns that we can't seem to understand as well. It's always, what is President Obama doing? So it's almost as if President Obama has to, one, be on cable television 24/7 as an analyst, as a pundit, to say, and here's what I'm doing here. No, but this is what I'm doing here. This is what. So I'm only going to respond to one, because you name a lot, and I'm going to just respond to one. And that is because I don't even want to deal with Katrina and somebody comparing what's going on the border with Katrina. That you will see so much of my emotion that I'm afraid my brother Charles will take me back to Louisiana. I have to chill out. I don't like the comparison. 1,800 people died. People were. Don't make that stupid statement ever again. Too many people died because of the ignorance and inactivity. That's not a conversation. Hillary Clinton, if you read her book, I know 600 pages, there are about 20 pages of pictures. I read the book. She made the same criticism and critique of the administration. She talked about all of these crises, all of these interventions, all of these actions, and she said on this one in Syria, she recommended, I guess as did John McCain and others, that we should have, armed a certain segment of the rebel population. That's what she said. Now, when the interview was given with Mr. Goldberg at the Atlantic, it was before President Obama had ordered the airstrikes in Iraq. And so because of timing, it looked as though she was criticizing Obama for acting too late as opposed to this conversation being put in context. Look, when it comes to foreign policy, President Obama mandate from the American people, not just Democrats, was to get us out of these two wars, okay? Not prolong the war, not try to fix what was broken, but to get us out and transition, to lead troops there and personnel to continue to train the Iraqis, and in the case of Afghanistan, the same thing. We all know about the status of forces agreement that President Bush couldn't get al-Maliki to sign. We know all of these facts, and yet when the turmoil begins, or when people finally figure out that al-Maliki pretty much does not want to govern in a coalition style, all of a sudden it's President Obama's fault. Well, he didn't fire his deputies. He didn't take the Sunnis away from the table. He didn't create this was al-Maliki decisions. So yes, the president, as he's doing, is responding. I also think that sometimes the criticism comes when somehow people forget that Vice President Biden is also on the case. He's working with the Europeans on the sanctions. He's engaged in the Ukraine situation. He's been the key. People forget that John Kerry, I don't know the last time I seen John Kerry on American soil. I mean, every night he's somewhere else. I'm like, God, he must have a dry cleaners in the sky. Or maybe he has those magic, no, stop it.
Okay, Donna,
anyway, but my point is that it's not a free fall. It is the August of every summer of my adult life in politics when somehow or another everything that appears on television becomes a crisis. This is not a crisis of leadership. This is not a failure of action. This is making sure in a very complicated world. And this is the thing that differs President Obama from President Bush, and this is a difference in principle and perhaps policies. President Obama believes that you have to assemble an international coalition before you make the kind of interventions that you want to make. President Obama believes that you need to inform your allies, get them on the phone, talk to them, let them know what we're doing. Maybe, in a world today where we still believe that we can just go in and invade somebody and beat them down with our military, that's the solution. That's not the way the president behaves. So he has a different approach.
I want to get everybody else on the panel engaged, but because you were responding to Amy, and Amy wants to respond. So briefly, Amy, would you respond?
Certainly. Well, in point of fact, President Obama unilaterally bombed Iraq over the weekend with U.S. military force without actually building an international coalition, and it looks like we may be getting sucked back into more extensive military action in Iraq. The president himself has said that it will be open-ended. Do not expect an end date on that. But in terms of, Donna, when you're saying people need to remember he has a lot that he needs to handle, the people that I just named were all Democrats. So does your plea go out to that side of the aisle to give the president this sort of leeway? I'm not talking about John Boehner or
I have no problems with
Mitch
Democrats
McConnell.
disagreeing with the president. I
Hang
disagree
on,
with the president sometimes.
Donna, hold on. Let
with
Amy
that.
just finish her point, please.
But
We're
when
not
I'm
talking
saying,
about the Tea Party, are we? And all of the disagreements with the
Don,
establishment. Parties fight.
Donna, excuse me, but let Amy finish
right,
her
no,
point.
but I'm just curious, Donna, what you think about the fact that you have sitting politicians, a former cabinet member, very openly criticizing, name on the record, this president's leadership. And when Hillary Clinton gave that interview to the Atlantic Monthly, she wasn't merely regurgitating what was in her book. She said that the president's sort of unofficial foreign policy slogan, "Don't do stupid bleep," she said, was not an organizing principle. This was clearly a direct attack on President Obama and what he had bragged as being his approach to foreign policy.
Okay, we're not going to be able to resolve that one, but we certainly got it out there. And I'm afraid Armstrong is going to sleep over here. But you know, sure, the world is too much with us at the moment, but do Americans really judge their president on foreign policy issues, or what do you think about that? I mean, is this really having an impact on how people see President Obama? And is it definitive in terms of how they vote?
You know, I used to be guilty of this. A staunch conservative. Whatever the Republican parties would trot out, I would sacrifice my values and belief systems, and my values would become that of the party. And sadly, that is what's happened to this country on both sides. We forget about what works. We forget about what America once was, and we become the mouthpieces of the party that we work for in some capacity, and we grow silent. It is a fact that American foreign policy just doesn't work anymore. Our ideals for democracy is not an ideal democracy in Libya, in Syria, and in these other countries. George Bush promised us that it would be Hallelujah Day for the Iraqis. Their lives would change, it would be better. It was better when Saddam Hussein was there, but we don't want to admit that, okay? We were told it would be better if we took Muammar Gaddafi out of Libya. What would happen? Their lives were better when Muammar Gaddafi was in Libya. And the same with Syria. The president follows the same policies as the presidents of the past because it's the military-industrial complex, and people lose and we lose. We need to change our foreign policy. It has failed. Democracy spreading around the world is a failure. We need to reevaluate. That is the problem. And innocent people are dying to the thousands. They're being massacred. By the hundreds of thousands of people died in Iraq. And you telling me that you don't know that something is wrong? We need to get away from these party labels and become Americans. To hold these politicians, Republicans and Democrats, accountable who sold us out. They get rich, they support the military complex, and these innocent people die. We would never tolerate it in America. It has failed. And until we become Americans again, and not Democrats and not Republicans, we will continue to have these tireless debates and innocent people will die.
Well, Charles Blow, you're looking very disengaged over there, but I mean, is that, how do you respond to that?
Oh, I have to respond to that. Okay.
Not unless you want to. We could always get Donna back.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen. Foreign policy is very much a part of the presidency. It's one of the only parts of the presidency that they do largely on their own. I mean, it is supported by Congress, but it's not. It doesn't require the same level of appropriations that individual bills required. And you know, if you look at what the president wants to do in immigration, well, he can't do everything he wants to do. You have to go through Congress to get most of that done. And even the things that he wants to do that don't require congressional approval require money, and it has to be appropriated by Congress. So, you know, part of the presidency that kind of stands on its own is foreign policy. That said, you know, there is some level of agreement in the sense that I am always leery of the war machine. It is an enormous machine. The Pentagon, Department of Defense, I should say, is the largest employer in the world, right? And if you look at it, and it produces even so much surplus, if you look at places like Ferguson and you see military vehicles on American streets, it's all spillover. Like, we produce so much, we spend so much money on the war machine that it is now spilling over into local municipalities and militarized local police forces. It's an extraordinary thing. I mean,
so are you saying that the president is a captive in this instance?
I'm not saying
a leader?
I don't know if it's captive necessarily. I am saying, however, that, you know, Bush got us into this mess. A lot of Democrats helped him to do so by voting for that war. And it's a mess, and you can't look at this guy and say, you didn't clean this mess up that somebody else made. He's not a janitor, right? Going forward, I do think that you have to set a vision of policy that does not say everybody is either good or evil in the world, because sometimes they are both. Sometimes you look around and you can't separate the angels from the demons. Sometimes Americans look around and want easy fixes because they don't know enough about world history to know that you cannot introduce yourself into ancient conflicts and expect an instantaneous fix. So I think that in one way we have kind of unrealistic expectations about what America can and should be and do in the world, and we are saddling this particular president with those failures of our own understanding or lack thereof of world policy.
No. You know, I find it interesting that right now we've spent almost 30 minutes talking about foreign policy, which has never been that critical to the American electorate. I mean, I know there's a lot going on in the world, but what about the domestic issues now that seem to be so divisive in the Congress and in the world? Like, are you a good Obamacare supporter?
Well, listen, I believe that the president is a good, decent, well-intended human being. I believe that he believes that government has a role to play in the lives of Americans. And I do not disagree with his vision that all Americans can have health care. But if you're sincere about health care for all Americans and for it to work, you cannot have the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies writing and shepherding the legislation. You just can't.
Is that what's happening, Donna?
Armstrong, hell, I'm going to have to cook for you. You know, Armstrong and I go back to the day when we were both trying to save black colleges. He went to one, I didn't, but we had the same mission. So thank you, Armstrong, for that statement. Obamacare was, as you all know, it was the worst kind of sausage being. I mean, it was nothing like boudin sausage. It doesn't even taste good afterwards. But it was a little bit of what the private sector wanted, and that's why, you know, the president worked with the Republicans to get the individual mandate, and you have that. And then it was, you know, the Democrats really wanted the public option, which we were not able to get. And so we have what we have. The good news is that more Americans today are able to get insurance at a lower rate than ever before. The bad news, and of course there's bad news, is that you still have tens of millions of Americans who are qualified to get health insurance, but because they live in states with governors that do not wish to expand the Medicaid option, they're unable to get the health care they need. So I wish we could come to a happy medium on Obamacare, and where we ended up with, you know, premiums being lowered. I got my letter the other day saying that I'm still grandfather. I said, no, I'm grandmother, because you ain't touching me. But, you know, we still have to go through some changes with this law over the next couple of years as we look to long-term fixes. It's not a done deal yet. And as you all know, we may get one more bite at the apple with the Supreme Court now that the federal courts have once again said that on the tax issue, if your state did not open up an exchange, you know, you're not qualified to get the so-called subsidy. So I still overall believe that Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, was a good decision. It has already lowered the deficit, and I think long-term the prognostics are good, but we need to get those governors to get on board to expand the Medicaid option to all Americans. No American should ever ever face death simply because they could not get the care they needed in order to live.
I raised the issue of Obamacare because it seems to be one of those lightning rods, that people judge the president by that. And there are many who say that this might be one of his lasting contributions as a president. Do you agree with that, Amy? Because you talk about free fall. Do you exclude Obamacare or include it or what?
Well, I exclude it in terms of where he is in his presidency in year 5.5, nearly 6. But I want to return to the question that you were asking, do voters vote on foreign policy? And for the most part, they don't. They did in 2008, to Donna's point about the Iraq War, being war weary, not wanting to, just wanting to get out of the quicksand of the Middle East. But I think that there's a more subtle way that the voters are assessing this president, and that's basically on leadership. And if you look at the presidency in this second term since he was reelected, what are the successes that he can point to? He began his presidency pursuing gun control. A lot of political observers told him that was a loser of an issue for him. The crisis notwithstanding. Even Democrats, vulnerable Democrats told him, don't put us in this position because we will be punished at the midterm. Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, it might surprise folks to know, he has an A rating with the NRA. When Wayne LaPierre campaigned for Harry Reid in 2010 when he was in trouble. So it was very unlikely that the president was going to succeed in a grand way on his gun control campaign. So we had that at the beginning of his presidency. Then we had Syria, where we watched him lurching from position to position and then finally asking Congress to bail him out. So to the extent that I don't think that the American people vote on foreign policy per se, they do vote on the perception of leadership. And if you remember, just this summer, the Washington Post had a survey out that found that a majority of Americans did not think that that they didn't have faith in this president's ability to lead. You have now Gallup with an approval rating at 42. Some polls show 39% approval rating. I think that is a byproduct of what you could say is a messy foreign policy stage, what even Chuck Hagel, the president's Secretary of Defense, said only in the last 48 hours that the world is exploding everywhere. I think that that's what Americans are responding to.
She's quoting the Democrats like we got a hip-hop band, something like that. I mean, but look at what the president has been able to do without Congress, because Congress is as popular as a root canal. It cannot even agree on when to adjourn. I mean, even when there's consensus as to when to solve a problem, they can't solve it because the one wing of the left wing or the right wing of this wing, they don't agree. So I don't think we should judge him based on what he's been able to get through Congress, because this Congress, as of today, is going to go down in history as one of the least effective Congresses. But, when the president announced at the State of the Union that he was going to pick up his pen, I said, I'll get you a six-pack. Pick it up and keep using. He's raised the wage of hundreds of thousands of federal employees to $10.10 an hour. That's improvement. That will help the economy. Too bad Congress wouldn't act to do it themselves. He's made sure that if you're gay, lesbian, bisexual, you are not going to get fired from your job. Come on, the president is going to use his executive pen because Congress will not, pass ENDA. There's nothing wrong with the president using his pen, going out there and doing the things that the American people elected him to do. I hope he can do much more on infrastructure. I hope he can do much more on job creation. I hope he does something to ensure that these corporations who are trying to leave America because they don't want to pay their fair share of taxes, I hope he uses his pen for that as well.
Armstrong, that was a very strong defense of what the president is achieving. But you are sitting here not happy with that.
There are many pieces of art that the president has created that you can judge him by. There are many more pieces that we cannot discuss and never will discuss. It's fascinating for me because I'm going to come back to the issue of race. Okay? I don't care about it, but we care about it today. And I'm glad you brought up the gays and the lesbians, because if they don't get what they want, they'll vote another way. They hold his feet to the fire. You have to respect that. He delivers. If you look at the Supreme Court, he delivered for that constituency that supported him. He delivered. The most loyal constituency to this president are American blacks. Overwhelmingly. I ask this question because I am a product of a historical black college and University of South Carolina State, and I know for a fact, no matter how much you debate it, they're cutting funds for these historical black colleges and universities. Yes. Yes, they are, whether you admit it or not. I know the gap in terms of education has gotten worse for black people. The prison population is increasing for black people. I would like to know, once and for all, because I haven't figured out, what has he done for his most loyal constituency that you can point to?
I'm the product of a historically black college, too, so I'm going to respond to that. Grambling State University, by the way. I think that you say you don't care about the racial question. I care deeply about it on this particular issue because I think that this is where policy and ideology overlaps with race tremendously. So if you look at states that did not expand Medicaid under Obamacare, for instance, a lot of them are former part of the Confederacy. A lot of those same states are part of the black belt of this country, where regardless of what you may see on TV, this is still where most black people in America live. When you say that you are denying people access to health care because you do not expand Medicaid in those states, you're basically saying you're disproportionately affecting the black population of this country by doing so. When you hear people harping endlessly about a high rate of children being born to single mothers, black mothers in this country, people don't talk about the centuries of this country endeavoring to break the black family, and in its most recent incarnation, doing so with mass incarceration, sucking thousands, hundreds of thousands of young black men out of communities where they're no longer marriage material, where at that point they are not able to pay child support because they're locked up. At that point, they are not able to contribute to the community, and then sending them back. And large part of that is for low-level crimes. These are things that everybody is doing. And in fact, half of all drug arrests are for marijuana, and marijuana is equally used. Actually, white people use it slightly more than black people, but black people are arrested for marijuana possession at 10 times the rate of white people. And so all of these policies happen on this local level, on a state level. All of those states are controlled by conservatives at this point. Maybe there are one or two exceptions, but for the most part, the entirety of the black belt is controlled by conservatives. And those policies, I mean, this is where you say, we could keep looking at these kind of racist incidents. I say, look at the racism and forget the racist. Look at the systematic racism that is working against black people. And that is a problem.
Listen, it's an interesting answer, by the way. To me, it's a non-answer also. And let me tell you why I say so, is that we understand that, and maybe this is my dilemma. Maybe when you're the president of the United States and people perceive that certain demographics are on the bottom rung of the ladder, no matter who's in power, there's not much that any president can do to change their circumstances. Is that the case?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you just said.
Okay. That's fair. I deserve that. I deserved it. Touche. I am saying, in this country, no matter who the president of the United States is, right? If you're on the bottom rung of the ladder, when you talk about the statistics, whether it's out of wedlock births, whether it's crime, whether it's not getting an education, whether it's dropping out of high school, doesn't matter what your race is, there's very little that policies can do overall to bring you out of your circumstances.
No, that's not true. What I'm saying is that there are levels to this, right? There are federal policies, there are state policies, and there are local policies. And on the state and local levels, the president has very little leeway. The states make their own policies, and the states where most African Americans live are now controlled by conservatives, and they're making policies that are not beneficial to most African Americans. And that's a fact.
I think Armstrong's question is, where do you think President Obama should take responsibility, and where has he been effective or ineffective?
Well, there's no
on what? I mean, that's over
very
the last
question.
8 years?
On the very issues you just raised about drug law. For example, Rand Paul,
Right.
a libertarian, actually wants to legalize marijuana.
Let's go to drug law. Well, let's not talk about Rand Paul because that's a whole other conversation. But what I'm going to say is,
where does the president take responsibility?
I'll answer that for you. And the moment that Eric Holder says that he won't enforce some drug laws because they are racially biased, the president gets sued because they say you're picking and choosing which laws you are willing to enforce or not. This is what I'm saying. That when wait 1 second. That's the fact, right? So there are issues on the national level. Healthcare is huge. Healthcare is absolutely huge. There's educational policies that he's pushed that have not gone far enough. I think student loan debt is disproportionately held by African Americans. They come out with a heavier debt burden, and they take longer to pay it off. And what studies have shown is that when people come out with larger debt burdens, they delay life choices because of that. They delay buying homes, they delay getting married, they delay having children, whatever. I just think what we're losing in this is that there's intersectionality to all of these issues that surround the question of how people of racial groups, particularly African Americans, are faring. And when we look at the president's, what the policies push, like Donna said, this Congress is not passing laws. I mean, they have passed fewer laws this year than any Congress, I think, in history, if I'm not wrong about that. The president has only vetoed 2 laws since he has been in office, right? That is the fewest number of laws since Garfield. Garfield lasted 200 days when he got shot, right? So people are not passing laws to even get to his desk, so he can't even say this is a policy that went into effect that I supported and this is how it's working or not. We can't even evaluate that because only the biggest parts of his policy agenda that actually went into law in the first 2 years of his presidency. And since then, he's been struggling with people who basically come to Congress because they have been given a mandate to go there and do nothing and stop him from doing things.
All right, but
Look, I'm here to learn as well as to share. And I do think that as President of the United States, if Chicago is your backyard, and when New York and LA has shown an example, much bigger cities, especially New York, that they can get their crime under control, do you really believe that there is absolutely nothing the president can do overnight to stop the killing fields in Chicago?
So now he's the mayor of Chicago. Let me just get this together. Let me just get you together on that because.
All I need,
and please don't point to New York and LA because what they did in pursuit of those policies, in pursuit of those numbers, is a blasphemy to justice. Right? That stop and frisk policy in New York, I wrote this. I mean, I'm sorry to be self-referential, but it's like burning down the house to get rid of the mice. That's not how you do that, right?
I asked a different question. What should he do? Can he change the circumstances? As president, Rahm Emanuel, his former chief of staff, is there anything he can do?
Go talk to Rahm Emanuel, and please don't ask me because I don't know what the president can do.
I deserve a fair answer.
And if
you don't have an answer, you can tell me.
Calm down, homie.
Okay. Hold it. Just hold it 1 minute. This is not morning television.
Exactly.
We want to hear everybody's point of view, and you can briefly answer that. Donna responds, and then I would love to give the audience, this audience that is really reacting to everything that's being said, an opportunity to ask questions. So let's have our answers now. And also, while you respond, I think it was out of Chicago that the phrase Barack Obama is the worst president in history, it was out of Chicago that came. So, Donna, you want to talk about that? And respond, but also in the context of the discussion that's going on between these two people.
I do believe that history will be fair to President Obama when we're able to look at what he's been able to accomplish in terms of the hemorrhaging that the country was undergoing through the Great Recession. People forget that we were losing 200,000 jobs, and we finally, this past June, reached this point where our employment level was up to par with those who are seeking employment, but still not far exceeding the number of people who are still unemployed. More than a third of black men between ages of 25 and 49 lacked employment in 2010. That's within a year of President Obama taking office. So the Great Recession had a huge impact on not just black wealth compared to white wealth, where we saw the drop and the number of black homeowners, because the first attack on trying to bring the deficit under control was cutting the federal budget, which meant cutting federal jobs. And who was the last hired? The first fired? Well, again, the public sector, firing teachers, policemen, firefighters, you name them. I mean, a lot of black unemployment existed well before President Obama took office because of the Great Recession, and it has gotten worse. Now, again, given the president's 6 pins, there's no question that I would demand that federal contractors, especially those with the military-industrial complex and others, I would demand that they have greater inclusion and opportunities for, federal jobs. Now, if you want to call it affirmative action, I don't care what name you give it. I believe that we need more opportunity back in society so that we can give those who lost their jobs through no fault of their own. Many of these jobs went abroad. The manufacturing sector went abroad. A lot of those jobs were jobs that African Americans held. When you look at places like Detroit, look at Cleveland, you look at the massive number of unemployed, especially unemployed black males, again, go back to the Great Recession. So the president needs to have a maniacal focus on employment of people of all backgrounds, but more importantly, people of color, because we are still hurting. In the 6 years since the so-called 7 years since the Great Recession, people of color disproportionately are still hurting. That's impacting, yes, Armstrong, whether it's Chicago, whether it's New Orleans, my hometown, where there were 2 people killed last night in the 9th Ward. 2 people. It's impacting. There's a culture in our community, there are no jobs. And so in our city, where our mayor, Mitch Landrieu, has targeted down to the street level where the crime is coming from. And there's a correlation between people who are working and people not working. People who are working, there's no crime. People not working, lots of crime. So let's get back to the basics. That young man who died the other night in Ferguson, unarmed, on his way to college. And then last night, no criminal record. What is a child to do in this country today just to be safe? I mean, when you don't know if you put your hands up, put your hands down, put them out, and you're going to still get shot? I mean, there's a lot of hopelessness, a lot of despair. And lastly, let me just say this. I just want everybody to know this. President Obama is not my savior. He's my friend. Okay? He's not my savior. All right? And government is not my savior. I hate those conversations. I believe James Brown was right. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I'm going to go see Get On Up. I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Just open the door. I get it myself. We have to equip our children to let them know that once they get that education, they can still get a job, no matter if their name is Khadisha or Jamal. We got some problems here. And I don't want President Obama to try to solve all of them. I hope he can encourage others, including the private sectors, to get in the game to help improve the employment status of our people in this country.
And by the way, before Armstrong responds, because he wants to, I just want to point out, for those of you who don't know, that the president did speak out today on the tragedy that you just referred to, and said that very strongly there be some into the incident. All right, Armstrong, sorry.
I am, without question, as you should be, outraged about what happened in St. Louis, but I'm equally outraged about what goes on in Chicago every week. 64, 84, it's going to soon be 100. I'll tell you what the solution is, since nobody wants to talk about it. Corrupt police officers. Until you, as New York, and no offense to police officers if you have to be in the room, because the majority are pretty good, but when you're bad, you're really bad and corrupt.
So
okay?
where do you think, what do you think the president can do about that?
They have to get that mob mentality out of police, get those corrupt police officers off the street, make them respect the rules, and set an example for the community so they can work with them, so children can respect community policing again. It starts with the police force.
Let me put another question on the table, and then I am going to the audience. I think it was you who said that the majority of black people did in fact vote for President Obama, and I think that there was an expectation that he might be the president for black people. I don't know. But has President Obama met the expectations of those who put him in office, particularly the black people? Let's start with you, Armstrong. Now we're going to answer these briefly.
It's unfair to put that expectation on the president. The president is the president for all people, and his policies and empower all, especially the least among us, and those that continue to struggle to find their voice, find their way, and find a better life in this economy. It's a false expectation. He can't come in on some black horse and ride in and save anybody unless you're willing to save yourself.
Amy?
I think the expectations were astronomical for this president, and no person could live up to it. But in no small part because President Obama raised those expectations. I remember pinching myself when I heard his speech at the Democratic convention, and I called my mom, and I couldn't believe it that this politician was talking this way. It was so wonderful to hear someone say, there's no red state in America, there's no blue state, there's, no black Americans, white. It was extraordinary. We hadn't heard that in our political dialogue my whole life, and finally here was someone who was talking this way, and I think it raised a lot of extremely high hopes. I mean, that was his slogan, hope and change. And I think we also need to remember that President Obama was elected with 53% of the vote. He accomplished something that Bill Clinton didn't. He got a majority of voters, and in his reelect, again, 51%, a white Democrat who was popular in 1996 wasn't able to accomplish that. Expectations were high for President Obama. His approval ratings coming into the office were over 70%. I mean, this was a transformative moment for America. Unfortunately, I think that President Obama, from the very beginning, that he set up his presidency in such a way that he didn't reach across the aisle. He had control of both Democrats. Listen to me. Yes, 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 yes. No.
Excuse me. That's not going to work in here.
No.
If you disagree, there are microphones on each side, and you'll have an opportunity to speak in just a moment. But that's not how we do things
some
here.
Of you will have your opportunity.
Amy, please finish.
Yes. So I will finish. If you look at the health care bill, for example, the Affordable Health Care Act, that was passed on a completely partisan basis. It was passed by using a legislative maneuver that wouldn't have required Republicans to ever cast a vote on this. I actually got in touch with my former boss, the former Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist, and asked him, did the White House ever reach out to you either on policy or politics to help pass the Affordable Care Act? Because he actually went on television supporting the Affordable Care Act, that he thought 70% of it was really good, 30% was not. I asked him in preparation for this panel, what did you hear from the White House? He said, I got a one phone call from Obama, 10 minutes, checking the box because I had complained to Harry Reid, and that's it. President Obama had the opportunity to reach out to a Republican leader who did it, who was willing to campaign even without that support, and he didn't. And unfortunately, we saw in 2010 the results of that politically. You had a huge backlash, and Republicans retook the House, and President Obama is now dealing with the consequences of that.
Thank you. Charles?
I think I agree with some parts of what was just said, in the sense that, expectations are individual in a way, and so it's really hard to know what people expected. And some people had extraordinarily high expectations, and some people had, I think, more reasonable expectations of him. But you can't let what do they say? The perfect be the enemy of the good, meaning, no politician. He is a politician. He's not a messiah. He's a politician. So every politician has flaws. However, if you agreed with the party platform to 70-80% of the party platform of Obama. I think that's what he's advocated since he's been in office. So it would be hard to say I agreed with the platform and I don't agree with what he's advocated. You can't make Congress pass anything, and therefore you may not have the results you wanted. But I think he has kind of stuck to the policy as he advertised it.
Thank you. Donna, when you respond, can you also talk about what Amy said, that the president has not reached across the aisle? He's not, done the Lyndon B. Johnson with the congressman. True.
A shot at it. I was thinking, some of you might know that I'm a super delegate. And I had an opportunity in 2008, and I had a lot of pressure. My dad, who loved Hillary Clinton, he used to say to my aunt, girl, you better put that woman in the White House, okay? And my sisters and brothers, of course, they said, you better put that black man in the White House. And boy, I would get my dad, that woman, my brothers and sisters, that black man. And you know what? I said, look, I'm getting old, I might support John McCain. So, but we broke the mold. And we should be happy that we broke the mold. Expectations were exceedingly high. Look, I knew that Obama never walked on water. We all knew that he was going to encounter resistance. We knew the partisanship would be difficult because some of us saw the Clinton years, some of us saw the Bush years. But what we didn't know was that Congress would really change overnight. And look, when Ronald Reagan was president, yes, I was around then. I was a young girl, but I was still a Hill employee. And let me just tell you something. Back when Ronald Reagan was president, 342 members of Congress considered themselves moderate. Am I right? You had a moderate Senate. I worked for Gillis Long from Louisiana. Every evening at 5 o'clock, I was a bartender. I went out and got ice, and they drank, and before you know it, everybody made it up, and we had bipartisan legislation. Today, President Obama faced a House of Representatives with only 4 moderates. 4. He faces a United States Senate with only 2 so-called moderates. So let's not compare him to Ronald Reagan and how Reagan was able to do it and how Lyndon Johnson, because those days are over. He broke the mold. And here's what I want to tell everybody who also into this backlash phenomenon. The successor to the first African-American might be a woman.
And
because we broke the mold.
Oh.
So I'm just saying, and 5 years from now, we might be talking about how sexism is back on the rise again. It never died, just like racism. Nothing dies in America. Everybody just replanted with another seed.
Donna, I'm going to come back to the panel at the end of our questions from the audience, and please start getting ready to get to your mics on each side. Because I do want to, include this discussion of race and racism, which may or may not be truly affecting the president's approval ratings. But it seems to me that it's really on the rise in America right now, and I'm not quite sure why. But let's go to our professor over here, who generally gives us the benediction, but this is not going to be the benediction now because we're going to go to the audience and have him maybe come back after that. But just
No, I'm going to go now.
You're going to go now? Okay.
What? You're going to have to explain to me why you ever try that, because it ain't going to happen. It is interesting to have to come in at this point after what's really been a terrific and rich and varied discussion, and if you don't mind, where we all have been cooking with grease, as it is. So the panel deserves thanks for that. And in some ways, we could have been striking the things on which there are agreement, which make, when we got off on kind of a soft launch, almost, because there seemed so much agreement. That, in fact, there certainly are and can be legitimate grounds of criticism, of President Obama and his administration and what he has or has not accomplished to this point, that not every word said in critique of Obama is illegitimate, not every word is unfair, not every word is harsh, and certainly not every word is motivated by racial animus that might be a criticism of the president. Clear agreement there. There's also surprising degree of agreement, I think, across our ideological differences here, that he has certainly been, in a fashion, bedeviled by racist imagery and symbolism, especially in the early days of his administration, and in some places, relentless and arguably idiotic critique of the birthers, and he's a Muslim, and he's not truly American, and all of these things. There were bigger differences on just how widespread and how consequential and how important or central any of that racist symbolism or imagery has been, or just how symptomatic any of those considerations are as indicators of the fundamental health or underlying dynamics of our body politic. And I want to start to get closer to that and think really deeply, if we can, about the troubling circumstances in Ferguson and in St. Louis, where unambiguously an unarmed black man with no criminal record on his way to college, where more than one witness attests to his hands going up, can be shot multiple times and killed. And we still do not even know the name of the officer who did this. It's grossly shocking. It's a horror almost beyond description. Even if one were to conclude there was some circumstance that motivated this officer when a fuller tale comes out. At this point, something outrageous has occurred, and we are all rightfully offended and sickened by it. But I was struck in our discussion here that we had gone 40 minutes before the term Tea Party was even uttered on this panel. And that not once have we mentioned Fox News. And I want to now think like a professor about the deep structure of American politics and why it is we have a do-nothing Congress and what happened in 2010. Let's remember 2010. All right? Let's go back a little further. Let's go back to 2008. Let's go back to that happy moment. Let's go back to Grant Park, Chicago. When Barack Obama is elected president of the United States with 53% of the vote, the first African American to do so, it struck me that for a lot of people, and I'm sure the sort of Republican leader who stood up and said we're going to make him a one-term president, that this is what they were thinking. All right, the Bush administration was a failed presidency, especially at its end. There were 2 horrible war scenes that were not resolved and were probably mistakes to have entered. The economy is in genuine free fall and collapse. It's time for a huge change. Any Democrat is going to win. And if you looked at the statistical models that include nothing about race, nothing about the specifics of a Democratic's program, what did 13 of the 14 statistical models that predict presidential elections say? They said the Democrat will win with 53% of the vote. Bada bing. At a minimum, the upside is that it proved that race didn't disable that. Obama's race did not defeat that core prediction about what the American people were going to do. My worry at the time was that people could then say the election of an African American president was somehow an oddity. It was an offshoot of that particular peculiar moment and could not be repeated. But he goes ahead, he governs. He shocked a lot of people because they never expected to see an African American face in the White House, at least not behind the desk in the Oval Office. And they were hoping to get rid of it anyway, and then he pushed the red button. He passed the Affordable Care Act, which sent a certain segment of the American populace into a lunatic zone that, quite frankly, a number of them have not returned from yet. Right? That there is a set of anxieties and fears and resentments that were catalyzed in that moment that changed the face of American politics. and I would argue now is still in many ways the controlling force in Congress, preventing there from being any I'm going on for a while, Charlayne. You held me back. I'm going on for a while. I see all my dear folks. I'm not going to hold you all on. So that we have this thing in which race, sadly, was the glue. It wasn't the whole thing. It wasn't everything. It wasn't the only thing. But my God, it's what stuck that dish together. The dough wouldn't have risen without that egg of racism in this case. The walls wouldn't have gone up without that cement of racism in this case. It would not be standing today in our way and undergirding a do-nothing, inactive Congress who has otherwise stalled a reasonable president. And what's kind of the acid symbolic test of it? People who denounce Obama as being the most racially divisive president ever. That is such an absurd Orwellian inversion of what is actually, and it could only happen in a place so deeply poisoned by racism and so unable to have a candid, intelligent, serious discussion about how racism organizes our politics. 98% of the Republican elected officials in the United States today are white. 98%. This is not a party that's reached across the line. It's not a Southern problem. It's a national problem. The way in which race has come to undergird our national politics. Obama got in both these elections a minority of the white vote, which most Democrats have for some time, but he did build this hopeful coalition. And that really is the note I will end on. And it's that he got reelected, that coalition stayed together. Some non-trivial large chunk of progressive thinking white America, super majorities of black and Latino voters, and really hyper-mobilized black voters in the 2012 election, and Asian Americans turned out. Will we be able to keep that together? Entirely unclear whether that coalition will stay together or even if the candidates in the field now will appeal to it. But there's a serious race problem here that is part of the deep structure. It's built into our parties. Those parties are woven into our institutions now, like who it is that controls the United States Congress and its ability to act. All right? So I don't want us to forget any of that because I saw it as kind of omitted from this discussion of, yes, there are legitimate grounds of critique. Wow, all this foreign policy stuff has loomed up and made him look ineffective, even though it was a world not of his making. And I wanted to kind of rewrite the agenda, not in a totally partisan way, but in a way that from my vantage, just diagnosed what's been happening out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bobo, and I suspect that when we have the final words from our panel, there might be some comments about that, but we'll see. Let's start over here, and please give your name, and we have very little time now, so let's try to be, as my usual phrase, pithy and brief. Thank you.
Thank you. First, my name is Letitia Jackson from Dothan, Alabama. First of all, I'd like to say that I have a question. I'd like a quick comment first. I think the high expectations with President Obama's election really is because we have an electorate who is basically uninformed and does not understand how public policy works and what the president can and cannot do. And I think it's incumbent upon those of us who are politically astute to educate the masses so they understand the role of the president, the role of their state legislatures, the role of their city councils. So I would like to ask the panel for 3 things that you would give to us of what we can take back home to make sure that the people that we're talking about, that were registering for the first time, that voted for the first time, that had high expectations but did not really understand the challenges of being a president and that the president can influence policy but does not make policy. So 3 things that you can tell us to do. That we can take
maybe
back.
Let's just do 1 or 2.
Okay, very briefly. Education policy, I think it's something we need to become a lot more educated about in terms of the federal role. The federal government only funds 7% of public education in America. It's really the responsibility at the local level. So if you want those changes, I think it's the number one civil rights issue facing America personally. But I think more voters need to realize that they shouldn't be looking to Washington for the solutions, but instead be looking on the local level in their own communities, their cities, and their state. So that's one.
Anybody have anything different, Donna? And just briefly, please.
I'm working. I'm Catholic. First of all, tell them what we've been able to accomplish over the last 6 years. Don't allow them to believe that everything is going to hell. That's number one. And number two, keep them engaged. Keep them actively engaged, because if they don't vote, we really lose. The dirty little secret in American politics is that in midterm elections, turnout has dropped so badly that you can elect a small minority of vocal, highly well-funded people that will not serve your interests and support your values if you don't vote. The other secret in American politics, and we proved this in 1998 when Bill Clinton was threatened and then impeached, is that when people do vote, they win. So remind them that if they vote, they will win.
And we've got several people here, so briefly, Charles.
I would agree with Amy from a different perspective, though, which is that kind of No Child Left Behind and education policies like that have kind of robbed students of civics courses. You put so much emphasis on math and reading that we don't teach enough civics, and when you give kids tests about how much civics they know very little. And so you continue to get a less and less engaged voting population. And so they show up for the personality elections, which are the presidential elections, but they do not show up for local elections. They don't show up for their state elections. They don't show up for midterms. And that is where the policies that are really going to touch their lives happen. And so people, if you know more about civics and how government works on your level, local level, state level, you'll do better, I think.
Armstrong wants to pass on that one, so sir.
At the University of Pennsylvania, and I want to go back to Ferguson, Missouri, because I feel like a lot of people in my age range have been deeply affected by the events that have transpired in the past few days. The fact that someone around our age, no matter what background they're from, and their innocence could cause them to die through police brutality. So I want to ask the panel what they think Obama can do from an executive standpoint to solve some of these ills, because we've seen that the Congress is deadlocked, so I want to ask you what you think he can do and what we as young people, I think, can do to support him and what he decides to do.
Thank you. Armstrong?
You know, you can pass all the executive orders in the world, but in that moment, in that instance, there's nothing you can do with someone who's carrying a gun and supposedly is to uphold the law of the land. I think it starts with how police officers are trained. We have done many stories on what happens in the academies with police officers. And the actual profile of a criminal is a young black man. It's just a fact. It's etched in their psyche, it's etched in their thoughts, and you couple that with the fact where you have a community that is 90% of that profile, and if those crimes are repeated, they begin to believe these people are criminals, and they react to that. And so what must happen is that the training must change for police officers. And even with the best training circumstances, a law enforcement officer should be the last resort for him to draw his weapon to kill anybody. And if you have to do something, wound them. Do not take their life.
If I could just add one small thing. In the very specific case of Ferguson, we know that the FBI, the DOJ, is getting involved in investigating the circumstances around it to take it out of the hands of the local police where there seemed to be the problem. It's a problem when only 3 of the police officers on that police force are African American. And I think all of us would agree that we need to shift from this militarized policing to community policing, that the officers are there to protect and serve us. We pay their checks every month.
I understand that the policemen there in St. Louis had Humvees. I don't know what that was about. Anyway, yes, sir.
Okay, my name is Joe Steele, and I'm a Harvard alum. So I first of all want to recognize the African American Studies for surviving and evolving, Professor Bobo and Skip Gates. My question is specifically to Charles Blow. I'm really curious about the underreporting in mainstream media about this whole rapidly revitalized white supremacist militia. And because it really does seem like there's treason involved, yet it doesn't really seem like it's being discussed in mainstream media. So any way to sort of get that out that you would suggest, how to stay on the top of the networks and what's behind that?
Well, I think the Southern Poverty Law Center does an incredible job of tracking militia growth, movement. They send out press releases to me all the time. They have I think it's a quarterly report that they publish. And I do think that they get quite a bit of coverage for being such a small group in, one state in the South. They get quite a bit of coverage. Mark Potok, who is one of the principals there, gets a lot of television time around the time that they produce their report. So I do think that it may not be as, to your satisfaction as to how much it gets reported. I do, however, believe that it does get reported.
Yes.
Can you get a little closer? Yeah, Jennifer Farmer. I work with the National Civil Rights Group Advancement Project, and this question is for you, Charles Blow. So you did a piece yesterday connecting Mike Brown with the school-to-prison pipeline, which, if you don't know, is the patchwork of policies that funnel kids directly from the classroom to the criminal justice system. Earlier this year, the Department of Justice, the Department of Education released data saying that African-American kids in preschool, 3-4-year-olds, are suspended, and that black kids in general are suspended, expelled at higher rates than whites. So my question is, besides releasing that data to the public, what else can President Obama, what else can be done to help close that gap and ensure that kids are placed on pathways to colleges and careers, not prison?
That's a fascinating question, because I'm not exactly...
Can you just repeat it, because I didn't hear the whole thing?
Well, can Obama address the school-to-prison pipeline is the crux of the question. And I'm not exactly sure that you can do it from the executive office of the federal government. I mean, this is one of those systemic problems that is woven through the fabric of America. This is not a last 5 years problem. This is not this generation problem. This is a 400-year-old problem that people look at brown and black-bodied people and see a threat and respond with a threat response, right? So, what a 3-year-old can do that 3-year-old is not supposed to do, that can get you suspended from school, is an extraordinary concept to even think about, right? So they threw a tantrum, they didn't wash their hands, they weren't, whatever the case. And so this is like a systemic thing that I think that benefits from constant airing and from the constant connecting of dots, because we always dissimulate these issues as if they are isolated. This is a prison issue. This is an education issue. This is a workplace issue and whether or not people can get hired. This is an educational issue and whether or not these people can go to college or not without federal help or loans or whatever. All of those things are connected. And once you lay them out end to end and you start in preschool, or you can even start not even in school. I mean, there's one study that really shocked me that found that even pediatricians would withhold pain medication from black kids at a higher rate than they would white kids who were all in pain. This is not always a conscious racial issue. Sometimes you can't even see this unless you step back and look at data and you see that, oh, wait a minute. This is not just an anomaly. This is not just this doctor in this office at this time with this particular kid who they think, oh, you tough, you can take it. 3-year-old just got suspended from preschool. When you put all that together, you see a system of oppression that impacts behavior. So you don't separate behavior from the system. Everything is happening in a context, and the more we talk about that, more we air that, the better off I think we are.
Yes.
My name is Jim Coleman from New Jersey. My question relates to voting rights. What, if anything, should the president or can the president do to address the issue of re-enfranchising inmates who have served their custodial terms and have even completed their parole obligation.
You know, that's one of those areas where Rand Paul has, tried to lead, but as you know, because of the 10th Amendment, that is a states' right issue. The president can do so much with the enforcement of voting rights, especially when they've been weakened by the Supreme Court, and I'm referring to Section 5 and Section 4 that undergirds Section 5. But one of the things we have to do is to try to ensure that state by state across the country that we meet with not just the Secretary of State, but also election officials to ensure that those individuals who have paid the fine, paid the time, are able to regain their voting rights once they are back functioning in society, paying taxes, et cetera. And I think it's just an anomaly. The one thing that has just struck me over the last, we talk about the racializing of President Obama, is that since President Obama, I spent years working with people across the board in the civil rights movement and other movements to ensure that every eligible citizen is able to cast his or her ballot, regardless of party. And in the last 5 years, we've seen these onerous, burdensome rules put in place where to just perform the act of voting, you have to basically come loaded up with your personal ID, your driver's license, your birth certificate, your utility bill, and it's just crazy. So we need to do more to protect the rights of all Americans to participate in electoral politics, but especially those Americans who've had their rights taken away.
Let me just ask quickly, sorry, Amy, do you think that the effort to get people to have their their IDs to come to vote, is that a political ploy against Democrats and against black people, you think?
I think in some cases that has been true, but actually when it comes to Hispanic voters, if you look in Florida, for example, the Republican Party there was going through the voter list and basically kicking everyone off the list who had an Hispanic last name without first checking whether or not, they were properly registered to vote. And if I were to look at the racial angle on voter ID, again, I think it has a lot more to do with undocumented people in this country and those states where those folks are going to live, and the efforts there to address the voting issue more than, I would say, a black-white issue. I mean, there are folks who can disagree. I'm happy to learn more about it. Okay. But if you look at Arizona,
hold on. Just let her finish her sentence, Charles.
If you look at Arizona, for example, when they passed voter ID, that had a lot more to do with illegal immigrants in Arizona, the Hispanic population in Arizona, and keeping political power, frankly.
Okay.
But if you look at the voter ID, I don't know how to get the lights on, but I'm not. Here we go. So, but the problem is. Yeah, but
I interjected.
I'm not going to be brief.
Sorry.
But the problem is that the laws, as written and passed, don't deal exclusively with that issue, right? So, first of all, it's not an issue. In-person voter ID, what is it called? In-person voter voting with as if you're somebody else simply doesn't happen. It statistically doesn't happen. Fraud. Why can't I say the word fraud? In-person voter fraud just doesn't happen on the scale that you would need legislation. In fact, it costs more to get this underway to do it. So what the laws they're passing are punitive. They're not addressing the problem as we kind of imagine it to be.
We can't resolve that one. I just wanted to open that door. We've got 3 more people to answer, and we've got a final treat from Charles Blow and brief statements from everybody, and we've got just a very limited amount of time to do it. So let's see, I think you're over there, the next question.
My name is Nancy Rose Steinbach. I'm the creator and director of Inglese Dinamico, which is an educational social activism project. Mr. Hutchins, I need to speak with you, in Venice, Italy. I left America in 2003 when George Bush was elected, and Barney Frank said, yeah, but you went to Berlusconi. And I thought to myself, well, that you're not, I'm not going to say, but he wasn't looking for weapons of mass destruction. He didn't have Dick Cheney as his vice president. The point that I want to make is that I fell in the street 5 years ago and became a disenfranchised American after being a white, doctoral level speech-language pathologist in America. What I want to say is that I want to do a little linguistic nitpicking here because of all of the issues that have been brought up, which have to do with social. And we have a fear in this country of the word socialism. And after living in Italy under universal health care and a social democracy for over a decade, I think that one of the things that we need to do, because what I've heard about here a lot is American exceptionalism, and it's been a brilliant panel discussion, but we still see only as America. Yet we're in Iraq, we're talking about Syria, we're talking about universal health care, we're talking about Latini, we're talking about blacks. Not that Europe is a perfect thing, but do you think that the election of Barack Obama is in fact a signal within a generation that we will move toward social democratic values as opposed to democracy? And I think that it's an important issue because I think this is where we're falling down.
Question, and who wants to answer that very briefly? No.
No.
Okay, sorry, that's it. If you want to talk to them afterwards, but that was their answer. But I think yours was more of a declarative statement anyway. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Eugene Marsh, and I'm a decorated Vietnam veteran. My question is, I am offended by the results of our men and women who are returning back from wars, who are not receiving the medical care and services that they should receive as men and women. Because of the fact that they put their lives on the line in war, we should do more for them other than giving them a pass for services that they have deserved and should be more deserving because of the fact that many of these women come back and men come back who are disenfranchised, unable to find jobs and employment, and suffer from PTSD. And I feel that the VA department has done an unjust job to serving our men and women in foreign countries.
Thank you. I think that's a very good declarative statement, and I don't think anybody up here will disagree. If you do, you can't talk about it now. Yes, what is your question?
My question for you guys is, my brother is applying to college, and I've had some exposure to the whole application system this year, and I've gone on a lot of college tours with him, and what I found is that in many of the colleges that we visited, people who are considered minorities are grossly and vastly underrepresented in colleges, particularly people of Black and Latino descent. And my question for you guys is, what can be done about that specifically, and what can the government do about that to sort of help to bridge the gap between people who are accepted into the colleges? And, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I think they understand the question. Charles?
Oh.
Thank you.
Well, I think it's important to remember that how much economics is connected to college admissions. For instance, the kid who can afford the $10,000 worth of tutoring and the summer experiences is going to get a little bit of a leg up. The people who can afford to travel to 10 colleges and actually go on the tours may have a better understanding of what that process is like. I mean, I think what we often think of college, the application process, as somehow a level playing field, that everybody is just trying their best and they go in and they take a test and then they come out of that test and we kind of objectively choose among those students. That is not the case. And until we realize how much being economically disadvantaged makes you educationally disadvantaged in terms of the opportunities that you have both on the grade school level and in going into college, then we don't solve that issue. So I think it's an economic issue. This idea of, the disproportionate number of African Americans not actually being employed or being employed and being among the working poor so that they're working 1 or 2 or 3 jobs and still not making enough to raise them out of poverty is a huge indicator as to why you do not see more African American or even minority kids going through the process, even just paying the fees. I have a college kid in college and 2 that are applying. I got twins that are applying. Pray for me, y'all. I got twins that are applying, and just the application fees and the tutors and the take the test fees, and it's an enormous expense. And I always think, because I didn't grow up with any money, how are people who were like me doing this? Like, how is it even possible?
Thank you.
But you did
Listen,
do it. You did do it.
I went to Grambling.
I hate to do this, but I'm getting the look from the boss here, and I've got to end this panel, but in 5 seconds each, President Obama is here, as we all know, on vacation. And so everybody, I'm sure, has an opinion about him and what he needs to be doing. But I'm going to ask you in 5 words or less to give some advice to President Obama that somebody in this room might take back to him. 5 words or less.
The president has earned his vacation. Let him rest for a change.
Five words or less. Well, the president is returning to Washington. I hope that he takes his break from his vacation, that he uses it productively.
I would just say, even when legislation cannot be passed, to continue to remember the incredible power of symbolism, just the idea that he has made it twice and is competent in the job and doing this job, and there is a black family in the White House, is an powerful signal that I don't think we will forget in a decade or generation.
That was a little more than 5 words, but I think they were worth it. Donna, I know we'll...
Well, I would tell the president to enjoy this wonderful place, rest up, read something other than the National Daily Briefing, and just enjoy being with your family and friends.
Professor?
Rest up and keep on keeping on. And,
Thank you.